The Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies, Minister Malatsi, says that claims that the proposed State Information Technology Agency, that's the SITA regulations and draft policy directive, this on equity equivalent investment programs, undermines transformation, are baseless and false. Now, this after the minister faced criticism for allegedly proposing changes to the local equity laws to appease foreign businesses looking to work in South Africa and possibly acting against the Independent Communications Authority of South Africa, that's the Icasa Act. Now, the minister also says that SITA regulations, which enjoy overwhelming support from ministers in the Government of National Unity as well as provincial governments, gives departments the freedom to procure outside of SITA. But to give us his position on these matters, we are joined now by the Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies, Malatsi. Minister, good morning. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning, Sakina, and to all the viewers of Morning Live.
So there's also an opportunity, Minister, for right of reply to you. So perhaps we just need to step back and remind ourselves of what was said earlier in the week by Ms. Kusela Diko, who's the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Digital Technologies and Communication in Parliament.
Empowerment legislation in this country is very clear. Anybody who seeks to operate in the telecommunications, in the broadcasting and the postal services has to get a license from Icasa, which is governed by the Electronic Communications Act. Now, that particular act is very clear that one of the preconditions for a license is to have a 30% equity ownership by historically disadvantaged persons. Now, what Minister Malatsi has sought to do, and that we argue he has no standing to do in law, is to issue policy directives that seek a deviation from law. Now, we've raised this matter with him on SITA as well, to say that you cannot change a substantive part of the law through regulation or policy directives. And over and above that, I mean, these laws have been in effect as the ECA in particular since 2005. You have countries that are operating in this country, including our mobile network operators, who work within the framework of the laws. There's absolutely no basis to seek to change the law. But the point that we're raising at this particular moment is that the minister seems determined to be legally delinquent. Either he disregards the laws that operate within his portfolio. We had the same issue with the SABC bill. We have the same issue with SITA and now with Icasa and the Electronic Communications Act. He needs to follow the correct processes. If he's unhappy with the 30% equity ownership, then he must seek an amendment of the law, and he's going to have to explain why he would want to do such for a single company.
So, Minister, how do you respond to that criticism that you received from the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Communications and Digital Technologies, that was Kusela Diko, on the proposed SITA regulations and the draft policy directive on equity equivalent investments in that program?
And thanks very much for the opportunity, because in the spirit of fairness, it is important that we factually deal with each of the two issues she mentions. With regards to the SITA regulation, Sakina, the SITA Act makes provision for regulation to be made. And the regulation that we are proposing, which is to empower government departments when they are able, and this is the key part, when they are able to present a business case in which they can showcase that they can procure ICT needs at a cost that is lower than what Icasa would, what SITA would normally do, and also at a quicker turnaround than SITA would do, that they should then be in a position to procure outside of the SITA processes, because this will also mean that government spends at a cost that is affordable to the state. And this is done on the basis that government departments have repeatedly expressed that the inefficiencies that exist in the SITA process, or on the sole reliance of SITA for ICT process, hampers the ability of government departments to respond agilely and cost-effective manner to meet their ICT needs. What we then did, in line with the SITA Act, was to do the consultation. That consultation was done towards the end of last year, and it involved writing to all government ministers, all provincial government, as were required by law. On the basis of those responses, we then improved the draft regulation, subsequently sent it to the Minister of Finance, who, in terms of the SITA Act, as prescribed, must offer his concurrence prior to the regulation being published. The Minister of Finance has subsequently provided that concurrence. If indeed, in some imagination, we're acting outside of the law, would the Minister of Finance have also provided his concurrence if this thing was not legally ground? Surely he wouldn't have done that. So that deals with this notion that this acts, this intention with the regulation is somehow ultra duress.
So with regard to SITA, what according to you is the problem with SITA, Minister? Because if indeed all departments are able to procure outside of SITA, where does it leave SITA then?
Yeah. Second, it's very important to distinguish. The distinction here is that they would only be in a position to procure outside of SITA if SITA can't meet or provide a cost that is lower and a quicker turnaround of what the department have presented they would do. SITA still plays a crucial role, and that crucial role would be around the norms and the standardizations in terms of procurement of ICT needs. And there will be instances, as there have been, wherein the option being presented by the department is not at a cost that is lower than SITA, is not at a cost that is shorter than SITA. And in that instance, they will then have to procure within SITA. We're saying that departments should, at the very least, be able, where they can, present a credible business case that is compliant with all the public procurement prescripts of the law applicable in our country at a time that is quicker and at a cost that is lesser. They should procure elsewhere. And that also empowers government to be able to be cost efficient.
Does your department have strategies in place to capacitate SITA, Minister? What are your plans to improve operational efficiencies at SITA, to plug the resource gaps that exist within SITA?
Absolutely. And it is one of the entities that I've spent a lot of time on since my appointment into this role, starting with dealing with the leadership instability that existed at the board level. We currently have an interim board there of capable men and women who are helping steer the organization during this transition period while we are in the process of finalizing the appointment of a full-time board there. We have also sought the assistance of the Public Service Commission to deal with the historic issues around collapse of good governance, around high turnover of executives, and dealing with the concerns that have been prevalent around violation of procurement processes in there, so that we can reinstall a new culture and a new sense within the organization around good governance, compliance, around transparency when it comes to procurement measures, and also speedy and quicker response times to capacitate the state, particularly during this digital era, as government is moving towards its digital transformation goals. That remains our continuous mission. And even this intervention is sought to ensure that the capacity of SITA is able to meet the needs of government, particularly around digital transformation.
We are, in a bit of a time crunch, so I'm going to move on to something else because there's quite a lot to discuss, Minister, as you well know, around SITA. But just moving on to other matters, the Independent Communications Authority, that's Icasa, that Icasa Act actually prescribes the regulations in respect to the limitations on control and equity ownership by historically disadvantaged groups. And that, of course, is that 30% equity ownership by historically disadvantaged person. So what is your position on this matter with regard to Starlink?
So, I mean, the portfolio committee chairperson has created a scarecrow argument about something that we haven't touched. And this is in particular relation to one company. And what we have sought to do is not in relation to one company. The fact of the matter is that in terms of the ICT Code of Conduct and that bouquet of empowerment empowerment regulations, particularly those that are applicable in all industries. We have proposed that in the ICT sector, because equity equivalent investment programs are not applicable, because this question has never fully interrogated. And in other industries such as the automobile sector, hence we've been able to see the massive investments that have taken place, particularly with BMW. The policy directive merely seeks to say, in the ICT sector, we need clarity around the applicability of equity equivalent programs. And when that policy directive is then issued, the public will be able to comment about the suitability or otherwise. And those comments from that process then determine the final determination. And if Ms. Diko and any other stakeholder in society has a different view, they can make the submission through that process. It's a process that is outlined by Icasa, and that process means that you can't ignore public comments because those feed into the final into the finalization of the policy.
What's the latest on that Starlink licensing issue, Minister?
Well, licensing applications are dealt by Icasa, and Icasa is then best suited to be able to indicate whether company A, X, or D has made an application or not.
And with regard to the SABC bill, what's the latest in that regard?
Well, the process with the SABC bill is now at cabinet level. You would remember that early this year, the deputy president made an intervention that led to a bilateral between himself and myself in terms of trying to understand the case that I'd been making around the need for the withdrawal for that bill. That was then presented to cabinet, and it's been deferred to that process. And once cabinet then finalizes the status, we'll then be able to have an update on it.
So we've heard from the chairperson of the portfolio committee, we've heard from you, and by all accounts, what she said, Ms. Diko, was that your relationship with the portfolio committee, with her, is productive, it's friendly, it's cooperative, and yet, you know, you've also claimed, you know, that she's waging a propaganda campaign. So what is the way forward here in terms of these two entities? And also, you know, have you received any communication from Ms. Diko, and have you responded to it?
I haven't formally received any communication from her. The communication that we saw and were responding to were her press statement, and that press statement was actually a response to an oral question that happened in Parliament the preceding week. I do have a robust relationship with the portfolio committee chairperson. We do have a productive relationship, and where we see things differently, because of our interpretations and because of the availability of facts that I have that she may not have, that is not an element of animosity. You know, we have to operate in a space where we can differ robustly so, and that's why our interactions, or at the very least on our end, have never been ad hominem but substantive.
And that's where we're going to leave it for today. Thanks so much, Minister of Communications and Digital Technology, Solly Malatsi, responding there to criticism that he received earlier in the week regarding the proposed State Information Technology Agency, that's the SITA regulations, and draft policy directive on equity equivalent investment programs, among others.